Hello Earth Scientists, welcome to your Lab 6 instructional video. This is for Lab 6, Structural Geology and Faults. So this is a pretty short lab, only 9 pages. It takes us through, first, understanding the structural geology of what we identify as either being conformities or unconformities. So make sure you read through this information, but the definitions here apply to the diagrams below. Let's begin with conformities of sediment. When sediment are laid down one above another in uninterrupted succession, the strata formed are said to be in a state of conformity. Now, if there's any disturbance, we would then identify it as being an unconformity. These are an erosional surface between the strata. Since this usually form when the older layers are exposed and eroded, unconformities can tell us about the history of the rock, but sadly, they can also erase millions of years of evidence. So the three types of unconformities we're learning about are disconformities, nonconformities, and angular unconformities. Disconformities are erosional surfaces within a sequence, meaning that they are sedimentary eroded on top of sedimentary. So the silly thing that I do to remember this is disconformity implies that this is the same kind of rock, just two different sequences. Nonconformities means that it's not the same type of rock. So in this case, we have sedimentary atop of igneous rock. Lastly, an angular unconformity means you have sedimentary on top of a tilted layer of any material. So as you work through this next page, here are 4 diagrams asking you to distinguish which one is which is a conformity or an unconformity. Then we move into folded strata, learning about anticlines and synclines, and then looking at how throughout erosion, if we're standing on the surface as structural geologists, we need to understand that even though on the top this looks very similar to this diagram over here, looking at the underlying geology implies to us that this particular one on the right, when it was squished together, it caused the material to squish down, meaning that the middle here is actually the most recent deposit. In the example over here, because these were squished together and forced up, this middle one actually seems to be one of the oldest deposits. Because remember, this would have been connected there, this would have been connected there, but they were squished together and then erosion occurred. The diagram down here has you walk through, if you're walking from left to right, which of these sequences would you be passing? So if you're going from A to C, what would B be? Moving forward, looking at relative dating in stratigraphy, so taking the tools that we've just learned, how can we identify which layer is first, second, third, fourth, fifth? When we say first, it implies it is the oldest. So what you need to do first is, read through the questions. We then need to order these layers in order and then be able to answer these questions. So remember, going back to the law of conformity and stratigraphy, we know that everything was laid down in a horizontal plane. And then if there's been some form of disturbance, such as this letter M, this faulting, that must have happened after the original succession. So in this case here, the oldest layer viewed here is actually H. So remember, H would have been laying this way. So you need to look, okay, H goes first, then would have been I, and then you work your way all the way through the youngest being F because it's on top. This letter G is a magmatic plume. So this happened after all of these things had happened, because this had then cut through here. As you see, this plume does not transcend above E and F, which means that G is older than E and F, but younger than all of the underlying geology. Once you complete that one, you become a master and do this one here. Same idea, same setup. Then we get to learn about faulting, because we can identify these fault zones here, these boundaries that have separated, but what are we dealing with? So what I have here are some examples of different faults. In order to work through the remaining part of this lab, you scroll all the way to the end and you have a model. You will then cut the model out along the dark lines, leaving the tabs here. You'll use these tabs to glue to create a box. I would also color it just to make yourself, make it a little easier on yourself. Once you've done so and you have a box, you'll cut along this dotted line here to make 2 separate models. So what ends up happening is we'll see that these rock layers, X, Y, and Z, are continuous. You'll see there's a river on top, a road, railroad track, This lab activity will have us work through this, always starting in the normal position where everything is a solid box, and then it will allow us to move letters to letters. So as an example, we'll scroll back up to the first one, which is identified as being a normal fault. It says once you build your model, locates letters A and B. Move B so it's next to A. So I'll go down here again to show you again. So when it looks normal, you move B to A, which means this side has to drop down. Once this drops down, you'll notice that the river will flow and hit a wall of rock. Well, what would happen? It can't be a waterfall. It would actually turn into a lake. So nonetheless, you'll be able to work through this activity. After building the model, you'll be able to then identify the 3 dominant faults that are outlined in this lab. Once you do so, it's asking you to draw what it looks like on the side. So once you move letters B to A, what does the side profile look like? So you'll sketch that diagram here. So again, you'll have your line here, and this shows down farther. So you'll do that for normal, reverse, and for transform. Be sure to read through all the questions, identify the forces that are involved in making these types of faults. Once you're done, go ahead and scan this using your Genius Scan app, turn it into one large PDF, submit it to Canvas, and you'll get credit for it. Thank you very much, and we'll talk soon.